think we're live here. Well, guys, welcome to Shop Talk for September 2024. I hope you guys had a fantastic turn season and everybody survived it. Congratulations to you if it was your first. That's always the toughest for sure. So a couple of housekeeping things. Again, first of all, let me do a proper introduction. I'm Wesley Dees. I'm the CEO of Student Housing Insight. If you've never heard of Student Housing Insight, we are a platform for student housing professionals to certainly network and also provide ideas and data for the industry. If you want more information, please go to studenthousinginsight.com and join our online community there. So a couple of housekeeping things. One, we want to utilize the chat as many of you guys are doing, not only to say where you're coming from, and also want to be able to use it to ask questions. So if you've got any questions for our panelists today, just make sure that you put a Q in front of it so I can easily kind of identify it and bring it up so that we can ask that of our panel. Well, hey, we don't have any updates today from NMHC. Both Matthew and Dave are at the board of directors meeting for NMHC for the fall, so they are not able to join. But I do have some upcoming events I want to make sure everyone's got on their calendar. First of all, speaking of NMHC, we've got the NMHC Annual Student Housing Conference coming up on October 7th through the 9th in Las Vegas. I think you probably missed the early bird special if you haven't registered yet, but you can find out more at the NMHC website. And again, that's just around the corner next month. Also coming up next month, if you're in the Philly area, BizNow is actually holding their annual Student Housing and Higher Ed Development Summit. They typically have done this in like June and July. They've moved it to September. I think they're actually doing one today in Austin for the Texas student housing market. But that is coming up on October 16th in Philly. And then a little bit further down the road in December, on December 9th and 10th, Interface is bringing back the 6th annual LeaseCon TurnCon. That will be in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you want more information, you can go to Interface's website or to studenthousingbusiness.com. And we'll also have Rich Kelly on next month to talk about what's lined up for that conference. Hey guys, I want to make sure that you guys are aware that with Shop Talk, yes, Student Housing Insight is the host and the producer of it, but this is very much a industry-led webinar that happens. We have a leadership committee that is we have 6 executives in the industry that sit on that leadership committee, and just wanted to make sure that everybody knew who the leadership committee that's serving for the 24-25 leasing season is, and that's Jason Fort with Asset Living, Laura Formica with Core Spaces, Brian Chelengoski with Graystar, and Aaron Bailey with the Dinnerstein Companies. We've also got 2 new members that have joined, Angela Abraham from Student Quarters and Erica White with Article Student Living. Also want to just acknowledge really quick both Adam Barley with the Price Company and Casey Peterson at Peak Made, who have just stepped down from their 2-year term on the leadership committee. And just want to say a big thanks to those guys. We certainly did a lot of improvements this past year, thanks to them. Well, guys, let's start talking about pre-leasing. What I've got here in front of you guys as I bring Charlie up, if I can find him here. These are the year-over-year pre-leasing percentage deltas as we track this past year between fall 24 and fall 23 lease. And as we can see, when we ended things in July, it was about 4% behind. So excited to see, what kind of he was able to do between then and move-in day. So we'll get into that here in just a second. But Charlie, welcome back to Shop Talk.
Yes, I need a haircut. I get it. How are you, Wes? Missed you.
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. We've got a great panel. We're going to bring them up here in just a second, but I wanted to kind of go ahead and hand things off to you, and let's jump into it.
Absolutely. So the last report was end of June, first couple of days of July, behind about 4%. And I can imagine that was a little tedious, some sleepless nights for a lot of individuals, whether you're on the ownership operations or anywhere in between. Question always came, is there going to be late leasing, right? Fortunately, I actually have good news. Minus the last couple months, as we've been dealing with some of the FAFSA and the slower leasing, et cetera, there has been a kind of a question mark around if I'm going to have good news to bring to the industry here. So,
all right, you're teasing it enough. Can I go ahead and
go ahead and jump into it? So, as of the 31st of August, National Police only 0.7% behind, which, if you think about it, that gap, one, it's huge, but that gap, if we would have stayed there, pre-leasing, 4%, did an additional 3.7% plus or minus over last year's velocity, right? So July, kind of the early days of August, et cetera, as we're getting into move-in, there was a lot of individuals that ended up making their decisions and signing leases. And ultimately, I think, for the previous 6 months, a lot of our panelists said the students are there. It's all really tied to, can they make a decision? Is their aid coming through? And just a lot of haziness around the decision-making process for those respective students to, again, figure out where they're going to go to school. So one of the biggest surprises, I would say, and who had the largest delta was actually the Southwest, where that gap is only 1.1%. I think at most it was probably one of the highest. And then, the Southeast being the largest from a beds perspective, jumped up only about 0.8% behind. The Midwest actually saw outperformance from year-over-year perspective, which is exceptional. There's a lot of markets there with some strong supply-demand imbalances, like a Lawrence, Kansas is always one that comes to mind. And there's also been a handful of new deliveries that happened in the Midwest this past cycle as well. So 0.7%, when I was going through the numbers with my team and looking at everything, with a fine-tooth comb, we saw a lot of properties in a lot of markets that were jumping, 3, 4, 5% on a weekly basis. So great from a standpoint of the students are there. They were just delayed a little bit on making the decisions. Obviously, you never want to be behind, but ultimately, with last year being, a record year from a standpoint of velocity and rent growth, ultimately we are in a great spot fundamentally as an industry. And we couple that on the rent growth side. So Wes, jump over to the next slide, if you will. You've seen some pretty consistent, so again, like around 6%. So that was, again, did that happen with rate changes, or were there students there, they just weren't able to make the decisions? We saw that number actually fluctuate a little up and down over the last couple of months on our end, but ultimately ended from a standpoint of rate growth about 6.5%. Last year, I think it was about 9.8 plus or minus. So ultimately, strong still from a fundamental perspective. And generally speaking, again, that speaks to the supply and demand. Definitely a strong, I guess, last 2 months. And a lot of these markets that were needing the velocity and, we're sitting at 82, 83, ended up getting into the low 90s, which I know is exceptional and making a lot of people happy. So that's really the good news that I have today. Again, we're finalizing the last bit of occupancy numbers as those finalize with some move-ins on the West Coast. I know there was a couple that had some move-ins last week. So we should have that available here in the coming week or so as we do our year-end report. But ultimately, we're seeing a strong last 60 days. And, I think as we talk with our panelists and on our pre-call, like that resonates across multiple organizations. So ultimately, very, very pleased with how things ended up. We got to do a little, a zoom in on that top right side because it gets a little crowded. But I guess we are the red line. So you can see that it kind of came back up there. But you had a drop down very similarly in the April, May. But that gap closed. It was a little bit more vertical versus horizontal, as you saw in 23-24 versus AY 24-25.
Yeah, everybody was sweating at the end of June. So good to see that gap close up. So I think it tells a lot about how resilient the industry is. But I think we got to start getting our panel on here and asking them what they actually saw on the ground and how that actually happened. But hey, anything on floor plans you want to hit on?
Ultimately, I think if you look at it from a standpoint of, I guess, the questions always come up around, growth and et cetera. Again, we're not going to make you do math. I always like to say that. But the biggest gap that was made up was ultimately on those smaller unit types as well. I think the studios and ones were at most in like the low 5% range. And, they ended up only about 1.5. I mean, obviously under the national average. But the 4 bedrooms, being, again, the largest floor plan type from a standpoint of the national coverage, were even keel year over year at around 91%. So that's on a pre-lease side. Obviously, there's still some final numbers to come in on the occupancy side. But last year, I think it ended up at 93.2. So we will not be at that point, but preliminarily, not too far.
Gotcha. Okay. Anything else on the rates or?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think one of the biggest things that we've always, the question that comes up is like the affordability ceiling and everything surrounding, hey, yes, there has been a large run up due to the supply demand imbalances in the vast majority of these markets. So ultimately, with the seeing growth is great. We're not, it's not outsized to the extent like it was last year, but ultimately, still students are coming to college. Don't read the headlines that there's a massive enrollment cliff. Obviously, there's a little bit of challenges, but with the occupancy or the pre-leasing velocity there at the latter half of the leasing cycle, and some still strong rent growth numbers, again, speaks to the fundamentals of the space.
Well, fantastic. Well, hey, let's go ahead and introduce our panel, and we've got a large one here today. Is we wanted to get as many opinions and perspectives as we wrap up this leasing season and talk about what all they've seen. So with that being said, Brenna, I'll hand it off to you to start introductions.
Oh, as you know, I do have a lot of opinions, so happy to be here. My name is Brenna Tucson, and I am the Senior Vice President of Sales and Training at Article Student Living. At Article, our portfolio consists of a little over 21,000 beds from coast to coast, of which almost all are owned and operated. In my role, I focus on driving both performance and growth through strategic sales and revenue management initiatives, as well as comprehensive training programs. I'm also looking forward to contributing to today's discussion, and thank you, Wes, for having me. Appreciate it.
Great. Kiona, we'll go to you next.
Wes. I'm Kiona Lee. I'm with Yugo as the Sales and Revenue Director. I'm based here in our headquarters in Denver, Colorado. I'm the newbie on the block, so thank you for having me. This is my first time, but I'm really excited to contribute and also learn more about student housing trends.
Great. Josh?
Josh Wilson with Granite Student Living, Chief Operating Officer. Only been with the company for almost 5 months now. Most of my career has been in development and asset management, but Granite found me earlier this year. So working with them to improve our leasing and marketing efforts as well as our operations efforts.
And one thing I just want to point out, Josh, and the reason I wanted to make sure that we heard from Granite on this one. You guys have got a very specific type of portfolio. It's mostly scattered sites, but you're in multiple markets. So you want to give just a little bit of a background on what that portfolio looks like?
Yeah. So as you noted, we're kind of in that shadow market, scattered site kind of asset class. And so we have 3 major markets in the student world, those being West Lafayette, Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, and Blacksburg, Virginia. And then we're in 3 or 4 other, I'll call it tier 2, tier 3 markets as well. We have about 10,000 beds under management.
Great. Adam.
Thank you, Wes. Hey, everyone. I'm Adam J. with Landmark Properties. At Landmark, I'm the Associate Vice President of New Development Marketing, and I'm responsible for our new student delivery lease ups. Landmark is a vertically integrated developer, builder, and operator of student housing. We are also now getting into BTR as well, so that is a little bit of a separate division. But I am, very proud and fortunate to work on all of our student lease ups.
Fantastic. You guys delivered, was it 4 this year?
We had 3 student deliveries at Landmark, and we had 1 third-party lease up that we were managing.
Gotcha. Jessica.
Hey everyone, Jessica Mancuso, Vice President at Asset Living. I had the privilege of being in a part of our leasing and training department for 3 years operationally. And then for the past 5 years, I've now come over to our new development division to oversee that and all of our lease ups that come through this student vertical. I'm really excited to spend some time with you guys today talking about pre-leasing and where we ended up as an industry. So let's get started.
Well, perfect. Well, for starters, I've got some questions that my leadership committee gave me. So I've got to start with those. I see some other questions in the chat. We will certainly get to those. But first question, off the top, how did your portfolio end up and what markets would you highlight? Good, bad, indifferent. What stood out to you? Who wants to jump into it?
I can start. Yeah, so if we're looking at Article Student Living's portfolio and comparing it to the numbers that Charlie had up here earlier, we here at Article are a few points ahead on that occupancy number. So we did, in fact, outperform the national number on occupancy. We are still leasing at a few assets on the West Coast, like Charlie mentioned. So we've got one in Seattle, Davis, and Santa Barbara. So, we are still leasing and do anticipate our pre-leasing percentage to increase maybe just slightly as school starts in about a week and a half. But for us on the occupancy side, something that we really think contributed to our success as to why we outperformed that number has to do with our renewal number. We achieved almost 36% renewed as a portfolio. About 1/3 of our assets achieved over 40% renewed, and we even had a handful that achieved over 50%. So great to see that here. And then, if we're looking at our portfolio rent growth number, we were, in full transparency, slightly below the expectations that we set forth for ourselves going into the leasing season. And really some of those tougher markets that we're kind of talking about, Wes, we did decide to pivot midway through the leasing season and focus really on occupancy just because the demand was limited and we wanted to make sure that we were achieving those occupancy numbers, which, overtook the rent growth. I would say for us, some of our toughest markets performance-wise were Berkeley. So for those of you that are in the Berkeley market, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. Minneapolis was another one. And then Boise, a lot of supply in Boise, not enough demand there either. So those were really our toughest markets if I'm looking at our portfolio. And then as far as really the ones that performed the best, we outperformed and exceeded our budgeted targets really in Auburn, East Lansing, Purdue, and Columbia, South Carolina, where at those assets we actually achieved double-digit rent growth for the 3rd time in a year. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I definitely want to get into some of those, metro urban markets that we've been talking about that seem to, Charlie and I had a lot of conversations, and I think starting in May about those markets seeming to, be the ones that were really lagging. Some because of, and I'm sure we'll talk about it because of new delivery, but some just because of, the other factors that come in with those markets and the conventional set that's close to it. So anyway, we'll get to that. Kiona, how about you guys?
Yeah, in line with Charlie's national stats, Hugo saw the strongest performance out in the western regions and the central regions. We encountered some headwinds in the eastern regions. So College Park, Philly, Cincinnati, like we talked about, were tough markets for us as well. Like everyone else, we had a bit of a later lease up, so we definitely saw that uptick in the summer months. But thanks to some of our focus on those late coming international students and some of those FAFSA awarded students, we were able to bolster that up through the summer months. So all in, we were able to outperform the national average, and we consider academic year 24-25 to be one of the strongest in our portfolio relative to the past couple of years. So very happy with the results.
I know you mentioned it earlier. What's the property count here in the U.S. for Hugo?
Just shy of 19,000 across 45 properties, coast to coast.
45 properties. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about asset and what you guys saw, Jessica.
Yeah, we have a little bit more supply bed count than Yuko, but we have about 110,000 beds across the country, 200 plus assets, and like article, we outperformed, and Yuko, we outperformed kind of Charlie's reporting. We sit at about 95% occupancy at this time, and we'll take on more as move-ins happen across the country. We saw about 7% rent growth, which is strong. When you look at our direct comp set, we outpaced by about 12% within pre-leasing. And overall, as the industry whole, we saw about 5 to 7% incline overall with that. As far as new developments, we delivered about 9 new developments with our clients this year. We pre-leased to 95%. We did see a little bit more fallout than we normally would. We usually see about 0.5, about 0.5% fallout. And that's due to the influx in market rate supply, as well as those shadow markets really decreasing their rents to stay competitive with the off-campus housing. As far as markets that really stood out, I think, Kiana, you and I talked about Cincinnati being one of those with, the late announcements of the university. But on a positive note, and staying within the new development space, Pomona stood out for us quite a bit. It's a market that doesn't have true off-campus housing. We came in, we really were able to educate the market and lease up to 100% within just about 4 months. And so that was a strong performance for us there.
Jessica, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear which market did you say that was?
That was Pomona, California.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Great. Adam, how about a Landmark?
So as I mentioned earlier, I'm really in the weeds with our new lease up student deliveries, but as our overall portfolio, including our operational properties, we got to 96% pre-leased. The properties that have had move in so far, we're kind of sticking to that number. We still have some properties on the West Coast that haven't had move in yet. They will later this month. So there's still a little bit of dust to settle, but that's where we expect to end up. And oddly enough, we were kind of in the same position with our student deliveries. We were at an average of just a little over 96%. All of them were at least 95%. So they hit their budget occupancy goals, which we're very pleased with that performance. I think I know the theme of some of the discussion is the pre-lease year over year trailing, and we certainly saw that with several properties in several markets. And at any point throughout the cycle, there was definitely sleepless nights, as somebody mentioned earlier. But I think it's worth noting that especially at Landmark, we're fortunate to have the bulk of our portfolio serving state flagship universities. And even though there might be variability every year, we're very confident that with our properties being well located, a lot of them pedestrian to these flagship universities, there's going to be strong demand from students to want to live at that type of product. So it was an interesting year for sure, but we're happy with how things ended up, and very proud to be 96% pre-leased and or occupied, depending on how you look at it.
Well, hey, before we go to Josh, we talked about, I don't exactly remember the number between Landmark asset and article about said another former company, but with article on new devs, it seems like Um, Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe the data says something different, but it seems like what I've been following, especially since 2020, when we had some obvious delays because of supply line issues and supply chain issues and things like that, with COVID. But the past two cycles, it seems like a lot of students have been very hesitant to to lease at the new dev property because of issues with delivery or whatever. It sounds like from what you guys are experiencing, that's not really the case this year. Is that the case?
I would say in Gainesville, that was the case for us. We were coming off 2 late deliveries in that market. And with this lease up this past season, we really had to educate and really just show the market construction updates, win back their trust. And we did so, and we gained some good occupancy for our lease up there. But I would say Gainesville was a market that saw some hesitation in leasing this year. But overall, I think that when you have the right price and you're coming in with the right product and the right time, it's all about the PPP, then you're going to lease well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, we delivered 2 this year, one in New Haven, Connecticut, which is the Archive, not a traditional purpose-built student housing product. I mean, it leases multifamily. So we actually started leasing there in April of this year, being that it doesn't pre-lease that far in advance. So, delivered with a little over 30% occupancy, which was pretty much where we wanted to be target-wise. So happy with that. But we also delivered in Gainesville as well this fall, and got to about 90% there. And I do think that generally speaking, there is a stigma associated with new developments and signing with them, concerned that they're going to be late just because of there being quite a few late deliveries across the nation, ourselves included. But like Jessica said, I mean, there is a price point for that too, to get people over that hump, whether that's the price point and the concession package, to get people over that point that they're more willing to take the risk in order to sign. And then in addition to having a great product. So I think, I can't remember who said it on our prep call, but it was like, if people feel like they're getting a great deal, you'd be surprised at what kind of objections they will overcome.
Well, yeah, I mean, new devs have always kind of had a premium that everybody wanted to get, and
right.
unlike single family home development where there's muddy boot specials. We haven't really had to deal with that in student housing, but so that is something that you guys are having to lean on for those new devs.
Yeah, it's something that we didn't have to lean on that in New Haven, but I definitely think that is something that we had to lean on in Gainesville this year. Of course, that's going to affect how we put together our revenue strategy for next year, or anybody who does that, who maybe comes in at less of a premium for a rate and concession package, that that will affect year 2 as far as your renewals are concerned. If you're working to get back to pro forma, there's going to be quite a few. There's going to be big jumps, right, on rate.
Yeah.
So just those are all things to think about when you are adjusting your rates and concessions to get full.
Gotcha. Adam, anything else to add?
I mean, I completely agree with everything that they just said. And, I think with our 2024 deliveries, we didn't notice any specific hesitancy because we were a new delivery. You're always going to have people that want to know more about the construction timeline, or, I don't want to sign a lease until you can guarantee me that it's going to be ready on time, those sorts of things. But that's every year. I certainly believe and have experienced that. If you're, starting a new lease up in a market that has just experienced a late delivery, that absolutely has an impact, and you see way more hesitation in that kind of environment. But for the markets that we were where we were having deliveries this year, we fortunately did not experience that.
Great. In your experience, is that, and I know it's probably different everywhere, but I'm just looking at the past 3 years. Do you think that's more of a jurisdiction issue where, the cities are maybe a little, overwhelmed, and that was causing the delays, or was it more of supply chain issues?
I definitely think that the municipalities can impact your construction timeline and make it more challenging, and that can in turn result in a delay. I think I wouldn't say it's more one or the other. I feel like at Landmark, I've noticed that the projects that we're the GC, we have Landmark Construction, building our project.
Right.
Everybody kind of understands the goal and how important it is to make sure that we're open and ready come move-in day. I think, there have been third-party GCs, over time that maybe they don't, see it the same way. And I think you get a little bit of a different experience there, but I wouldn't say it's more one or the other.
Great.
I would agree with that, Adam. We had 11 delays a year prior, and we are true third-party management. And there's a myriad of reasons of why permitting, GCs needing subcontractors. There's a myriad of reasons of why there were delays. And so I would agree there isn't just one pinpoint reason, but how you handle that delay and the recovery process of that asset is the most vital thing in taking care of the student and the resident population for sure.
Gotcha. All right, Josh, tell us about Granite and the perspective you guys have had with how things have ended up.
Yeah, so I'll go over our three major markets and then kind of hint at the secondary and tertiary. So first in West Lafayette, where we've got strong demand over supply situation right now. We finished up close to 99% there. We did have one new dev that we were that we were leasing up this year. We did benefit from the oversubscription compared to what Purdue was expecting for freshmen this year. So they did a handful of master leases of some off-campus property. Benefactor, one of those that got us up to about 95% at that property. So really good situation for us in West Lafayette right now. Over to Virginia Tech, good metrics there as well. We ended up just over 99%, where we have about 4,000 beds over there. So very positive situation for us there, including with rate growth. And then the one that was kind of unique was Bloomington, where it wasn't performing as well as last year. We were lagging. We had 3 new developments, which was a bit of a challenge on the team there. And but so I think the market in there ended up about 88% occupied. And we were lagging that very late in the season. But over the last 5 to 6 weeks, we got a ton of leasing activity and actually ended up at 95%. One of our new devs actually, I think, went up from in the 75% range up to the 95% range over that. Or I'm sorry, that wasn't a new dev. That was one that was not performing as well as last year, but went from 75% up to 95%. So really good for us. We trended relative to the major purpose-built student housing pretty consistent in all the markets except for Bloomington, where we lagged and then finally overtook them. And then in the tier 2, tier 3, we've got Radford, Richmond, Indiana, IU East, and Indiana State and Terre Haute. There was a unique situation with Terre Haute where we had some challenges starting the leasing season. So we didn't end up quite where we were last year, but we did have a strong finish. I think if we didn't have those challenges, which we don't expect to next year, we end up close to 95% plus there. Outperformed in IU East, and then in Radford, it's a challenged market where I think they're down about 2,000 students from their high. The next couple of years should be good due to some policy in the state, but I think we ended up about 86% there. So overall, it was a really good year for us.
And those markets where you've got a good, a portfolio that's really mixed between single family and duplex type stuff as well as purpose built. And I know this was obviously your first cycle at Granite, but was one product type leasing better than the other in any of those markets?
Not necessarily. It was the division was really in the new devs compared to the same store. So the 3 new devs in Bloomington, they all ended up 90% plus. A couple of them in the 95% range. The one in West Lafayette, if we didn't have that master lease from the university, we wouldn't have ended up as well as we did there. But it was really that division between new dev and same store.
Gotcha. Well, hey, I want to go to my next question, and I've got a couple of questions from the chat that I've got stored. I'll certainly be getting to those, and if you've got any, please put them in there. But so this, ever since about March, we've been talking about the FAFSA fiasco and the delays and everything that were happening with that fumbled rollout of the Department of Education. It was certainly by May we were saying, okay, yeah, there's definitely some things going on. The Department of Ed spent about $50 million at the beginning of May to deploy NGOs and other groups to these states that were really behind to try to get them caught up, and that seemed to have a pretty big impact. There's actually an article this morning in the Chronicle, I believe, it's either the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed, where they're already practicing, with a group of students for this next one, but they've already said, look, we're not going to be able to make the October 1 deadline. It's going to be December 1. So we'll see what kind of lasting impact that continues to have. But as far as from the leadership committee, they wanted me to ask this: do you have any sense of what impact the FAFSA fiasco has played on leasing velocity as well as enrollment at your institutions?
I can go if you want, Wes. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd say the one that we have a suspicion about is Bloomington, just because of the way the velocity went. I think we'll probably find more out about that as we go into the fall and the winter, as more data comes out. But that's the one where it seemed to stand out the most.
That's interesting because Indiana was like, as soon as everything got on the track, so to speak, they were the ones to catch up the quickest. So that's interesting you say that.
Yeah, for us, we don't have any solid data points that point exactly to FAFSA affecting leasing velocity. But if we do look at some of our markets where, there was a slowdown, I would say, Minneapolis is one of them. Columbus is another, where it really started to slow down and then it picked back up relatively quickly near the end. Those are the ones that we've, identified that likely had an effect based on the FAFSA delays.
With Brenna and Jessica on that one. So Minneapolis, we heard University of Minnesota was slow. So was University of Cincinnati. We definitely saw that they delayed very late into July. That's why we were holding out, hoping that we would catch them overflow. But the school hit capacity very late in the season, and there was not much left for us to pick up after that going into August in both of those markets.
I will say for asset living, when you're looking at our portfolio holistically, it affected just a minority, not a majority of our assets as far as FAFSA. And so I would say like Cincinnati, she mentioned Houston, some California markets, but really it's the exception, not the masses.
I agree. It's certainly an exception. By the way, I want to apologize. I've got a sick kid at home, which I'm sure everybody has experienced at one time.
Oh, the chat is lit up saying hello to Carson.
Well, I've also got a cat that thinks now is a good time to walk back and forth across the desk, and I'm really trying to fend him off. But I'm just gonna, I apologize. But I don't think we have any hard data that shows that FAFSA delays were into specifically slowing leasing velocity or students signing leases off campus. But for me personally, in the lease up portfolio, Tampa, Florida was one that trailed significantly prior year, and eventually it did close the gap over the summer. But that was one where we definitely felt like the FAFSA situation probably was delaying students' ability to make a decision about, A, attending USF, and B, making a decision for off-campus housing. I was speaking with one of my colleagues at Landmark the other day, and he had mentioned that New Brunswick, which is Rutgers University in New Jersey, was another one where I think they had a lot of really late acceptance acceptances go out, and we saw, a rush on off-campus housing kind of correlate with that as well. So those are a couple that stick out for us.
All right. Charlie, I know you just came back from a conference out on the West Coast. Any discussions on FAFSA from that you took away?
Yeah, I think affected some more than others, I think, is the general rule of thumb. But I think what a lot of people are expecting is, hey, if the university did have some, a drop in enrollment from that, they probably will overcorrect and see a larger, acceptance rate for this coming year. That was kind of the only trend. But I mean, ultimately, some markets hit more than others. But like, I think Alabama was one of the worst. The state of Alabama was one of the worst offenders from a standpoint of the delay or the lack of, I guess approvals or fast applications, whatever the metric is. But if you look at a lot of those markets, like they still ended up fine. So, generally speaking, it definitely slowed things. But ultimately, I mean, if we're down, we're behind whatever 0.7%, sorted out in some way, shape, or form. I think the big effect is not as much us, but more the students, and not really being able to exactly know what their financial situation would be to go to school A or school B. So we'll see what happens after the fact. But ultimately, it's a mixture of different things. Like, you can't just say, hey, it's only FAFSA that caused X to happen. I think there's a lot of different factors in a lot of these markets that did see some challenges or a tempered lease up this past cycle. So part of a larger, I guess, multi-pronged problem versus just one specific item.
Gotcha. I think we lost Josh, but I think we've got him back now. So
there he is.
All right. Well, let's get to kind of the last question that I had from the folks on the leadership committee, which is, looking forward. It was amazing talking to you guys on the prelim call, how you've got some properties that are already, leased up into, I think somebody said like 27% or something. So we get no break anymore. There used to be a day, I'm older than all of you guys, but there used to be a day when from, end of August to middle of October, you just enjoyed actually being able to be a student housing manager. And now that just doesn't happen anymore. So looking forward, obviously there's a lot of, conversations we've talked about, what's happened with rates in some of these markets. We've also had a lot of discussions this past year on, especially as we came back from fall semester into spring semester and having to change things around a little bit with the marketing plan, and maybe spending some money where, originally it wasn't planned, or maybe you thought you could get away without doing it for 2024. Looking forward, what kind of adjustments are you guys thinking about?
I can go again.
Go for it.
But yeah, Wes, I do remember when we used to launch leasing right before Thanksgiving. So you actually had 2 months to kind of, chill. But I agree with you, not anymore, because we are one of those that launched leasing about a week and a half ago for, I'd say, about half of our portfolio, and the rest has been launched this week. So we have been very encouraged by the early renewal numbers and even some early new leasing numbers that we have seen across several of our assets. So, good news there. But, for us, kind of like the markets I was talking about earlier, we are going to continue to be aggressive in the markets that outperform, have minimal to no supply. So the Auburns, the East Lansings, Purdue has some supply, but we are confident in healthy rent growth there. Same thing with Columbia, South Carolina. And then, for some of our markets that we really struggled in last year, where there's a lot of supply, whether that be on campus, off campus, or if, there's some enrollment fluctuation, we're not going to be as aggressive in those markets. And we're going to make sure that we are going out strong so that we can obtain occupancy. But I do believe, just looking holistically at this upcoming year, that the new norm for rent growth will continue to be higher than pre-pandemic assumptions. The normal 3%, I do think is not. That's pre-pandemic. Do I think it's going to be as high as it has been in the years past? I mean, probably not, which is shown in a little bit of cool down that we saw this past year, or this past leasing season. So, but yeah, I mean, I am confident that we are going to continue to see higher than those pre-pandemic 3% numbers in rent growth.
Okay.
Yeah, I can go next. As far as asset living, when you take a look and you go back to Charlie's report and you break out the different regions, the Southeast always has a strong performance. I think they're second this year to the Midwest region. Charleston is coming off of a great year, and we are pleased with the launches that have happened in Charleston, along with Gainesville and Clemson. Any adjustments that we'll make will probably be in the Iowa City market. We had a lease up there. We came very strong in and out with rates as far as our launch was concerned there this past season. Concessed quite a bit, but gained the occupancy to about 91%. So this year we have another lease up going into that market, and we are treading carefully. We have gone over rate exercises, maybe 5, 6, 7 renditions now for Iowa City. So we're going to be very careful for that market and how we launch there. I would say as far as predictions, and we've launched already at 60% of our portfolio nationwide, with more launches to come this month, but already outcycling the previous year. I would say conservatively about 5% is our prediction, but we would love to stay at that 7 to 8% that we saw this past year in rent growth.
Hey, yeah, I can go. So
is a number in the past, because so is launching pre-leasing in October. We definitely started our campaigns for next year at the end of August. And like with Brenna, we had some early traction come through already. So our strategy was definitely to push rent growth for those top performers that outperformed goal here for academic year 24, and continue with the consistent approach for those that were sort of the mid-pack performers. So those were the 3% group, Brenna. But for some of those underperformers, that's where we want to remain a little bit more flat, just because there's some uncertainty in those markets. But already seeing great success out of those hot markets from last year. For us, that was like a Fayetteville, that was in Austin. We even have some early traction in Greenville this year. So we're already off to a really exciting start for 25. Definitely north of that 3%, just like Jessica.
All right. I think Josh kept having, there he is. He's having power outages.
The hurricane's here. I apologize.
I forget you're in Memphis. So yeah, thoughts are with all those that are having to deal with that today, as well as the earthquake in California. Josh, any thoughts on adjustments with marketing strategies or rates or anything going into the new season?
Not necessarily the marketing strategies. We expect the rates to be positive, pretty strong, especially in West Lafayette, where we've got a good supply-demand situation there. Won't go into the details of what we're going out for. We started our renewal campaign last week, and that's going very well for us right now. I think it was in West Lafayette where we had almost 300 renewals come back in already. So off to a good start.
Great. We've got a couple of questions here. Let's see. Adam, I think this is for you from Matt Reddington. What will the student housing market look like in about 15 years when your kid is ready?
Man, I think about that probably more than I should. I hope that I am still working in student housing in 15 years. I don't see any reason why I wouldn't, but it is kind of a crazy thought to, think about how much things could change. I know a lot of us on this call have probably been in it for about 15 years. I have, and it's a totally different world now than it was, back in the early 2000s. And So, I think, as you get more institutional operators and, everything, a lot of stuff that is near campus is truly purpose built. I think, the experience for students is going to continue to improve because there's going to be so much of a focus on that. So, I'd like to think that it, just continues to get better. And, we have a lot of great options for Carson when it's time for him to go to college.
Yeah. Yeah. Along those same lines, we've got a question from John Bauer. John, good to see your name on here, man. What does everyone think about the impending population cliff? Universities talk about this with some regularity. Yes, they do. It was 2025 is kind of the date that everybody was looking at for this enrollment cliff. I would say a lot of universities and institutions had, that kind of 2025 to 2030 is, hey, we got to do some things to change things up a little bit when it comes to how we're recruiting and everything else. If there were universities that were talking about it, I felt like after 2020, they went ahead and put it into play. I think UT Knoxville is probably a prime example of it because they just immediately started accepting every senior in the state. And you could see that in the rest of the UT system, where enrollment went down and everything went up in Knoxville. But yeah, would love to hear from you guys. What are you hearing as far as and this enrollment cliff is just population, right? It's just birth rates and immigration that we're talking about. That's nothing we can all personally do, but
I'll take this one. I think generally speaking, the larger universities are going to continue to get larger. If the economy stays where it is too, and the job market continues to be challenging for postgrads, it's going to put that much more value, the ROI on a college degree. Looking at the information, like you bring up Knoxville, I think over the last 2 years, it's been about plus or minus 10% if you blend that together. And then I think like West Lafayette, speaking of Josh's backyard, they've over enrolled 6,500 new kids, only a handful of new beds that have really come online. So ultimately, your smaller universities are definitely going to see that a lot. Call it your tier 3, tier 4s. But your larger state schools, your more prominent private schools will continue to grow. And I don't see them trying to slow down by any means. Just making it that much more enticing for students to go to the larger university versus the smaller tier 3, tier 4 school. And I know a lot of states are actually making it easier too. Like Wes, we talked about this, but here in Georgia, they've eliminated the SAT requirement for a couple different universities, which has just jumped up some of the enrollments at some of these smaller schools too. So I'm a firm believer in that kids will still go to college, right? How that learning happens. I think it's going to be a little bit more concentrated versus so spread out at some of these smaller institutions. You're already seeing that, I think, in Birmingham. Birmingham Southern shut down, and now you just have Samford and UAB in that market. So, and they had 1,000 kids. The economics might not make sense for a lot of these smaller schools if they can't either come together or morph together with other smaller universities. But ultimately, I don't think this is anything in the near term that we're thinking about.
Any thoughts from anyone else?
I have a little anecdotal story. So in my last stop, I was at Akuho High in 2023, July of 23, I think it was, and had lunch with a housing officer from a Midwestern university, a big flagship university. And I was kind of biased. I was asking for myself because I have a daughter who will be a freshman in college, fall 26. I said, so, the demographic cliff that's coming, how much is she going to benefit from it? And her response was, just you wait, you haven't seen anything yet. So the well-capitalized schools are obviously going to be throwing dollars at that problem, is what it seems like for recruitment. So, further in what Charlie said, the bigger flagship schools are going to do really well, your directional and tier 2, tier 3, they're going to have their struggles. There'll be some that'll really suffer, but flagships are going to do really well considering that comment.
Yeah, always a flight to quality for sure.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for joining today. Really quick, Charlie, any other parting thoughts before we wrap this up?
No. I think, everything's kicking off. We get our first update for 25, 26 tomorrow. And I'm interested to see how things go. We're still below the pre-pandemic levels of new supply. And, the fundamentals of student housing remain strong. It's great to see the latter half of the leasing cycle, last 2 months, seeing such strong velocity. But ultimately, the supply and demand plays true. There's just, a lot of these universities are growing. We talk about, a handful of them, but ultimately, that's where the student housing is, and we'll continue to benefit from that. I think we got around 40,000 beds delivering this fall, which was a little bit in line, plus or minus, with this past, but it's still down 25%. And yes, I'll get a haircut before I see everybody in Vegas.
Nice job from Jason there. Well, guys, thanks everyone, and we're a couple of just ending housekeeping items here. The next one is going to be on the next Shop Talk that is going to be on October 17th at 1 p.m. So about a week later than typical, but because of the conference in Vegas, got to push that out till October 17th. I hope that you guys got some benefit out of today. If you did, please share Shop Talk with your colleagues. You can have them register to receive our email invites at shoptalk.info. Again, that's shoptalk.info. Again, just want to thank the panel today. Thanks so much from you guys. Any other parting thoughts from any of you guys? All right, silent group. A little shocked.
Thanks,
Well,
everyone.
Well, guys, thanks so much. Good luck with the start of the new season, and we'll start talking about those numbers in October. Take care.
Thanks, Wes.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.